My parents forced me into a parental role at 13. I was mama to 6 kids while they vacationed. Now CPS arrived and I let their perfect image burn. My parents brought all the infants into my room when they got home from the hospital. They claimed to have a very mature daughter. I assumed this was typical. Mom used to say that in excellent families, the youngest children were raised by the oldest girls. Parents might then concentrate on what really matters. I trusted her. What else was it that I knew? This was my mission, my work. I was troubled by the warning that accompanied the expectation. Mom remarked, holding baby Aiden. Social services will take all these kids away. If you ever complain or ask for help, you will be divided up and placed in various residences. You won't ever see one another again. Do you want it that way? I cried at the possibility of losing them when I was 9 years old. With a smile, she gave Aiden to me. You're their only opportunity to stay together, I reasoned. My parents were carefree, but I took care of everything, doctor visits, homework assistance, potty training and midnight feedings, as if they were invisible. They passed wailing infants in restaurants. I oversaw 6 children at one table, while they sat at a table for 2. I nodded and smiled when passers-by asked whether I was the babysitter. You could lose everything if you tell the truth. 6 hostages posing as siblings had been entrusted to me by my parents. A piece of my heart was carved by each one. The baby Kevin would only fall asleep if I gave him a perfect back rub. Despite speaking their own language, the twins, Luna and Linda, were continually translating for me. Even at the age of 10, Aiden would crawl into my bed when it rained. Ethan used a crayon to draw me pictures that read, I love you, Mama. Every single day, Ivy referred to me as her best friend. I was desperate and drowning, yet I was never able to call for assistance. I feared that they might be taken away. They were safe and I was the only parent they knew. I couldn't possibly jeopardize that. My weariness was noted by the school counselor, who provided resources. I was on the verge of crying and telling her everything. Then I saw a vision of Luna sobbing in a foster home and wondered why I'd allowed them to take her away. I grinned and explained that I simply needed more sleep. I had become a ghost by the age of 13. I would get up around 5 in the morning, must find matching socks for 6 children, pack lunches, and braid hair. Letters came home because I missed so much school. But I faked my mother's signature and hoped no one would call. I occasionally slept off while still holding Kevin. At last the truancy officer arrived to look into it. My parents pretended to be surprised that I had been absent from school. We didn't know. Mom responded kindly. Her expression told me everything. They're gone forever. With a single word. I so admitted my guilt, admitted that I had been skipping and agreed to the repercussions. After that my parents decided to go on a week-long cruise, leaving me with $50 and 6 children. After 3 days, Luna broke her chin open after falling from the playground. I held her at the hospital while she sobbed into my neck, soaking my clothes with her blood. Without a parent they wouldn't treat her. For 3 hours I sat there trying to forge autographs to save my baby sister who was wailing and bleeding. At last I broke down and gave my grandmother a call. Her countenance altered when she got there and saw me, covered in Luna's blood, attempting to reassure 5 scared siblings while nurses contemplated contacting social services. After treating Luna, she packed her van with the rest of us. I pleaded with her, please don't let them take us apart. They're all I have, but I know I'm not doing well enough. They'll break us up if you tell anyone. I was crying so much that I was having trouble breathing. Grandma stopped and hugged me as I collapsed. Oh, she continued, my dear. How did they harm you? An adult witnessed what was happening for the first time in 5 years and I was afraid of what might happen next. My parents phoned the police when they arrived home to find the house empty. They played out their scenario flawlessly at Grandma's place. Mom sobbed, our daughter won't let us parent. She tells the children that if they come to us for anything, we'll leave them. She distorted the situation despite our best efforts to assist. They're all traumatized and attached to her. Now we were separated for interrogation by the social worker. Through the walls I could hear Kevin yelling for me. My heart felt like it was being torn out with every cry. Mom had forewarned me about this exact moment. My babies were about to be taken away. She poisoned them against us. According to Dad, we fear that if we split them up, she would harm herself or them. We have been cautious in our efforts to restore normal boundaries. Because of this, I watched as my grandmother began to question their statements. The social worker had a distressed appearance. She inquired as to who looked after my siblings. I saw that she was writing severe attachment disorder in her notes and Aiden pointed at me and said, Mama. She started calling regarding emergency placement. We were divided up and transported to various residences throughout the state. By morning the only people I cared about were going to be gone because I had never been permitted to be their sister alone. The social worker's pen scratched across her clipboard as my world fell apart and Mom caught my eye and murmured. "I warned you." Kevin's cries became more urgent. Even though I knew it wouldn't, my arms ached to embrace him and reassure him that everything would be all right. Grandma moved to her seat next to me beneath the table. Her hand found mine and squeezed as she saw my parents. The skepticism I had noticed in her eyes appeared to falter. Mom used a tissue to dab at her eyes, but no tears came. She spent years honing this performance through doctor appointments and school conferences. Dad gave her a shoulder rub and pretended to be sympathetic, but he also gave me stern looks. Whenever the social worker turned away, Miss Chen turned her notes over. We had been split up for separate interviews by her standard procedure. She had stated. We sat in Grandma's living room now feeling as though our lives had been decided. High and frightened. Aiden's voice floated through the wall. He was requesting me, not my parents. I was the one who knew how he liked his sandwiches cut and who looked beneath his bed for monsters. Miss Chen cleared her throat. She appeared worn out, as though she had witnessed too many dysfunctional families. Her gaze shifted calculatingly between me and my parents, with a mother's worry. Mom leaned forward. She described how they were concerned about my mental health and how I had threatened to hurt myself if I were taken away from the kids, lies that are enough grounded in reality to seem plausible. I started to explain myself, but Dad interrupted me with a story about how he found me sleeping upright at 3 a.m, still holding Kevin. He framed it as carelessness rather than fatigue, as if I were the threat rather than the remedy for their desertion. Grandma gripped my hand more tightly since my parents had arrived. She had been silent as she took in everything. The blood from Luna's wound had dried into rust-colored spots on my shirt, proof of my loneliness when it counted most. Miss Chen inquired about the event at the hospital. When Mom described how I had abducted Luna without her consent, her face fell into train destruction. She did not mention that they had been inaccessible aboard a cruise liner. The lies built a case against me, one after the other, like blocks. I was erratic. I was in charge. The issue that needed to be resolved was myself. My brother's voices could be heard through the walls during it all. When would Linda be able to visit me? Ethan wanted to show me his new art, so he broke down in tears. Ivy maintained that I was not her sister, but rather her best friend. Our destinies would be decided by the tidy lines that Miss Chen's pen made as she recorded everything. Her assessment of a situation, too convoluted for any manual to cover, might be the difference between 7 lives. Dad continued by telling me that I had taught the twins that our parents didn't care for them, an additional deception with a hint of reality. I had never spoken such words, but after Mom passed them like furniture, I held them as they sobbed, even though I didn't believe it. I had explained that different people exhibited love in different ways. My siblings followed. When Miss Chen's colleague entered through the open front door, the moment he spotted me, Kevin's tiny body trembled with relief and he lunged for me, knowing that this might be the last time. I grabbed him and held on. They came toward me one by one. Beside Kevin, Ivy climbed into my lap. My sides were squeezed by the twins. With his hands on my shoulders, Aiden stood behind me, trying to be brave at 7. Even Ethan leaned against my knee. Mom let out a little cry of anguish, as if to support their argument about unhealthy attachment. Dad sadly shook his head. Grandma, however, had her eyes on something else. She observed how my body curved protectively about them, how I instinctively examined Luna's bandage and how I moved to make room for all of them without thinking, as I had already done it 1,000 times. Miss Chen took an interest in our cluster from a professional standpoint. As Mom described how the kids wouldn't accept proper boundaries, she took additional notes. They were trained to depend entirely on me. There was a discrepancy in the parents' account. As the social worker observed, all 6 children clinging to me as if I were their entire universe. They were sobbing at their daughter's refusal to let them parent. Kevin's breath shook and warmed my skin. As he buried his face in my neck, I gave him a back rub in the precise pattern that helped him relax. Muscle. Memory taking over. Grandma's voice came out of nowhere. With a gentle authority, her voice broke through Mom's tirade. She requested that Miss Chen share some of her observations from the previous few days. Mom's expression tensed. They had no intention of doing this. They had anticipated Grandma being bewildered, overburdened and susceptible to manipulation. They didn't think she would actually notice us. Grandma told how she found me at the hospital, covered in Luna's blood, yet maintaining the composure of 5 other kids. She described how I oversaw breakfast that morning and made sure every child had everything they needed without my having to ask. She brought up the lunches I packed with notes in each, the permission slips I signed and the homework folders I arranged. Grandma continued despite Dad's attempts to stop her. She explained the nighttime ritual she had observed, including how I read 3 distinct stories for various age groups, checked on everyone twice and answered all of the calls for water monsters or comfort. For a moment Mom's mask fell off before she caught herself. A look of pure irritation crossed her face, but Grandma, and more significantly Miss Chen, noticed it. The social worker requested a private conversation with Grandma. We were left with my parents and the co-worker. When they entered the kitchen, the stillness was so long it may break. Mom gave me a look that said there will be consequences, as if he were chewing words he couldn't say in front of witnesses. Dad's jaw worked. Despite their lack of understanding, my siblings sensed danger and pressed closer. Hours elapsed in minutes. Weary from crying, Kevin dozed off on my chest. In their own tongue, the twins muttered. The hands Aiden, placed on my shoulders, shook a little. Something had changed by the time Grandma and Miss Chin got back. The social worker took a fresh look at our meeting. Something else caused her pen to pause over her clipboard and she saw past the attachment disorder. She declared that in order to find out where we lived and how we managed, she needed to visit our home. Mom's smile hardened. Dad gripped his knee tightly, citing late-night privacy concerns. They attempted to decline. However, Miss Chen persisted. That was protocol, she said. To properly appraise the children, she needed to examine their living conditions. Grandma offered to take us all on a drive. The only options available to Mom and Dad were to agree or appear to be hiding something. With my siblings still clinging to me like lifelines, we got into cars. It was like going to an execution. On the drive to our house, we got closer to the evidence I had been hiding for years with each mile, the calendar where I kept track of everything, since I was too tired to remember the lock on the outside of my door and the single bed where the 7 of us slept. During the journey, Mom had a delightful conversation with Miss Chen, telling her about vacations we never took and family game nights. That never happened. Dad offered supporting information with ease and practice. However, Luna decided to speak up from her car seat at that very moment. Her tiny voice was audible. She inquired as to whether we will be returning to the room, only the room, not our house, not home, but the room. The rearview mirror caught Miss Chen's attention. Briefly, what room do you mean? She asked Luna. My courageous, wounded younger sister clarified that we all remained in the same room at all times, as I was there to protect them. The kids enjoyed having sleepovers in their big sister's room. Mom said, laughing falsely, that was sweet, wasn't it? All siblings did that, didn't they? Not to be outdone, though, Linda added that we didn't have sleepovers. It was where we resided. Everything was there, including our toys and clothes. In order to care for us, Mama required our clothes. With the exception of the sound of tires on asphalt, the automobile fell silent. Mom clutched her purse till her knuckles turned white. Dad looked directly ahead as if he could make us vanish. We arrived at our driveway. From the outside, the house appeared typical, a suburban paradise with 2 levels and a lovely yard. Nobody would ever suspect what took place inside. Miss Chen requested to view the plural of the children's rooms. With her heels clicking on the hardwood, Mom took the lead. She discussed systems that didn't exist and renovations that never took place. She unlocked doors to unoccupied, spotless bedrooms. The surfaces of the guest rooms were dusty and the closets were empty. Rooms were furnished for kids who had never stayed there. Then we arrived at our room, mine. When she saw the doorknob, Mom hesitated. Dad said it would likely be messy, so we should forego it. You know how teenage girls are. However, Miss Chen persisted and the truth became evident when the door opened. The wall was pressed up against a twin bed. In the corner was a crib. In the closet, sleeping bags were wrapped up. 7 children's clothes in a variety of sizes filled a drawer during their dinner parties. We had been kept inside by the lock on the outside of the door. Miss Chen entered carefully, observing everything. I had constructed a homework station out of a card table. Each child's school materials are kept in color-coded bins. The wall-mounted schedule recorded the times for feedings, diaper changes, and the due dates for permission slips. Mom began to explain quickly. There was something about my insistence on this arrangement. Her voice increased in desperation, but it was something about teenage disobedience and control concerns. The lock was inspected by Miss Chen. When she tested it, she discovered that it only functioned externally. Why would a teen's door need to lock from there, she said, in order to prevent the younger children from going out at night. Dad muttered something about safety, but when I was afraid, fearless Aiden, who still called me Mother, spoke up during company. He described how the lock kept us inside, how, when it struck me, I had taught them to be silent to keep them from crying and upsetting them. I had turned it into a game where we were hiding from dragons. The truth came out in fragments. Ethan displayed his paintings of 7 small characters without any grown-ups, all of which were addressed to Mama. Ivy stated that because the other adults were busy, I always fixed her. Luna explained that every night, when the party music blasted through the walls, I sang them to sleep. Miss Chen snapped photos. She took notes. My brothers gave candid, naive answers to her thoughtful queries. The facade of my parents was broken by every statement. Mom made one final attempt at manipulation. She whispered to Miss Chen that she was concerned about my mental health, how I had displayed symptoms of delusion, thinking that I was their mother. How I turned down their attempts to aid me. Grandma, however, had had enough. Growing increasingly appalled. She had remained silent throughout the tour. Now she raised her voice, trembling with rage. She inquired as to when my parents had last given their kids food or assisted with their schoolwork, when they read a bedtime story or kissed a skinned knee. She questioned them about their anxieties, favorite cuisines, and the instructors. Their kids had quiet. Grandma wasn't finished. Despite Dad's attempts to divert, she questioned why a 13-year-old's rucksack had permission slip forms. What made her memorize the pediatrician's number, why my siblings and my selfies were the only recent family images. At last Mom's mask broke. They'd given me everything, she snapped: food, a roof, and loving siblings. What else was it I wanted? I thought, but didn't say, love, a childhood, parents, and the opportunity to be a sister rather than a mother. My throat was stuck with the words. She had seen enough, Miss Chen. She declared that she needed to speak with her supervisor and make some calls. She strongly advised the kids to spend the night at Grandma's place in the interim. Although Mom objected, it wasn't a request that was made apparent by Miss Chen's tone. The following actions will be communicated by her tomorrow. An investigation, house calls, interviews and, if required, court participation would all take place. My stomach dropped as I heard the word court, but Grandma's hand came back to me, steady and certain. She was aware of what they had done to us and to me. We collected what we could transport, preferred plush animals, Kevin's unique blanket. A cushion was shared by the twins from the doorway. Mom and Dad watched as their ideal parent persona came to an end. Mom grabbed my arm as we got back into Grandma's van. Just enough of her nails dug in to cause pain. Her breath was hot against my ear as she leaned in close. She brought to my attention the fate of foster children, how they were divided up and distributed to various states, how some people never crossed paths again, how my lack of gratitude was the cause of this. However, Grandma intervened and freed us from Mom's hold. She informed my mother that they were solely to blame for this. Abuse was the term given to what they had done. Silently, we drove off. My siblings, worn out by the emotional turmoil, fell asleep all around me. I wondered what the future held. As I gazed out the window at the passing street lights, Grandma was walking through familiar neighborhoods. When the lights became blurry, Kevin was warmer on my chest as I held him closer. Aiden's head was resting on my shoulder as the twins who had fallen asleep held hands across my lap. Only Ivy and Ethan remained conscious, their eyes wide with bewilderment. In the dark, Grandma's house seemed like a haven, with weary kids clinging to whatever part of me they could grab. We staggered inside. I put them to sleep in the guest room, continuing our custom. They would be terrified of anything else. With my fingers entangled in my shirt, I attempted to put Kevin down, but he whimpered. Ms. Chen recently saw the childhoods of 7 children fall apart more quickly than a cheap sweater. While standing next to a bedroom door that shut from the outside, Mom continued to try to sell her worried parent persona. How about misreading the room? I had just gotten everyone settled when the house phone rang in the kitchen. Grandma's voice reverberated through the small walls. Mom made demands and accusations in a loud voice. Grandma hung up in the middle of her sentence and grimly emerged from the doorway. My folks were already planning their next course of action. She explained they had contacted their acquaintance, a lawyer who owed their father a favor. It was a rotating manipulation machine. I wrapped blankets about my siblings while my hands performed routines that I had mastered. Grandma looked on from the doorway. Her face a mixture of grief and rage. She muttered that she ought to have known and paid more visits. I gave a head shake. My parents had performed their act too well. The morning came too soon. Ms. Chen made an early call to arrange a follow-up appointment later that afternoon. She clarified that she had to interview each child individually, standard practice when dealing with several minors. The idea of my siblings being questioned by themselves made my stomach turn. While I dressed the children, Grandma prepared breakfast. My parents had never bothered to get clothes that fit them, but she did. The vibrant flowers made Ivy spin around in her new dress. My chest tightened with emotion at something so simple. We had just finished our meal when the doorbell rang. My parents were dressed immaculately and stood on the porch. Mom was dressed in her church attire, which gave her the appearance of a loving mother. Dad was supporting her by putting his arm around her shoulders. A woman accompanied them in order to address me. She identified herself as their family counselor, whom they had been visiting. I couldn't prove it, but it was another lie. The counselor used language that made me sound distressed, while she talked quietly about enabling behaviors and familial concerns. Grandma would not allow them to enter. The porch was where the conversation took place. My siblings watched, leaning against the windows. Mom saw and gave a bright but fake smile. Not one of them returned the wave. Grandma received a folder from the counselor. Included were printed emails purporting to be from professors who were worried about my interactions with my brothers. I was aware that they were fake. The language was overly professional and the dates were incorrect. Grandma's face, however, was tinged with uncertainty. My parents promised to bring their lawyer back after they went. As she went by, the counselor gave me a shoulder pat. Help was accessible when I was ready to receive it, she whispered. I felt my skin crawl at her touch. Grandma laid out the papers on her kitchen table inside while I tried to keep my siblings busy. She attentively inspected each one. Aiden, however, had had enough pressing a crumpled piece of paper into my hand. He slipped to my side. It was his journal from school, the one I had assisted him with the previous month. The topic of the entry was family. He had used stick figures to illustrate our house. 2 larger ones were far away and 7 smaller ones were grouped together in one room. Aiden seems confused about family roles. His instructor wrote in red pen, "Please bring up the topic at the conference." Grandma's jaw tensed as she read it. She inquired about Aiden's parent-teacher meeting attendees. I claimed to be the babysitter. Since parents, not sisters, were expected to arrive, he explained, pointing at me. She started calling other grandmothers and her church friends who had expressed worry about not seeing my siblings. These were parts of a puzzle that my parents were unaware of. Every morning, as my parents' cars sat in the driveway, I would escort 6 children to the bus stop, as Mrs. Patterson from down the street recalled. At 2 Ms. Chen showed up on time. She brought over a colleague with expertise in cases involving several children. They prepared to interview each child separately by setting up in separate rooms. I knew I couldn't shield them from questions I couldn't hear and my chest constricted. Kevin refused to leave me, so he went first, being carried by Ms. Chen's colleague. Before they gave up and brought him back, his cries reverberated throughout the home for 20 minutes. He shivered and buried himself in my arms. The twins argued that they couldn't be separated and insisted on going together. I could hear Linda's clear voice describing their daily schedule through the closed door. She explained how, since Mom claimed it wasn't her responsibility, I braided their hair every morning. She explained how I was able to determine which twin loved jelly and which liked peanut butter. I was taken aback by Aiden. With his shoulders squared, he entered the room, my courageous kid attempting to keep us all safe. After half an hour he came out with red eyes and a determined expression. I told him everything about the door lock, he muttered. Ethan brought his sketches. He carried a stack into the interview room and I saw it. Ms. Chen's colleague followed him out with one picture in hand. It displayed 2 adult shapes standing outside a thick black border with a figure with a label, Mama, surrounded by smaller figures grasping the doll Grandma had given her that morning. Ivy went last as Ms. Chen escorted her away. She spoke anxiously. Her voice traveled well through the door as she described how I read her stories and fixed her. She claimed that because the other adults were often too busy. I looked for monsters. Ms. Chen asked me questions in the kitchen as they interviewed my siblings. She inquired about decisions about schooling, healthcare, and daily routines. I was too tired to lie, so I gave an honest response. As I described how to forge permission papers and signatures, she took notes. I discussed skipping school to attend pediatrician appointments and using $50 to feed 7 children for a week. Why hadn't I told anyone? She questioned between us. The question hung heavy. How was it possible for me to explain years of psychological conditioning, the continual fear of separation and Mom's belief that I was the only thing separating my brothers from catastrophe? Still, I gave it a shot. I told her about the time Mom drove us past a group home, the nightmares from stories about foster care and the warnings that began after Aiden was born. She explained how my selfishness will force my brothers to suffer there. The look on Ms. Chen's face changed. She inquired as to whether I had ever been permitted to host guests, whether I went to school functions and whether I had any interests other than taking care of my siblings. No, was the response to everything. As darkness drew near, the interviews came to an end as I prepared dinner with Grandma's assistance. Ms. Chen and her colleague had a private meeting. The questions unnerved my siblings, who clung to me more than usual. Since his attempt at an interview, Kevin had not let me go. Ms. Chen gave an explanation of their initial results. Parentification and role confusion were evident in the children's behavior. My siblings honestly thought I was their main caretaker. When they were away from me, they displayed severe anxiety and little attachment to our parents. The following day she planned a formal evaluation. Our family dynamics would be assessed by a child psychologist. She strongly advised that the kids stay with Grandma in the interim. I heard Mom's outburst from the other side of the room as she called my parents to share this news. I didn't get much sleep that night. My siblings gathered around me in an attempt to find solace, but the options were racing through my head. What if my parents and the psychologist were in agreement? What if they concluded that I was the issue? What if the best course of action was actually to divide us up? The morning presented further difficulties. My parents came with their lawyer, a man who spoke in measured tones and smiled too much. He used legal jargon intended to scare and confound as he showed paperwork regarding custody agreements and grandparent rights. Grandma, however, had also called her friend's daughter. A family law lawyer consented to provide us with pro bono advice. She showed up right before the meeting started, her eyes as steely as the other lawyers' smile. Separately, the psychologist showed up. Ivy was calmed by Dr. Martinez's gentle demeanor and loving eyes, and she was younger than I had anticipated. Without intruding, she watched our morning ritual, taking notes while I braided the twins' hair and assisted Aiden in tying his shoes. My parents did well. They gave each youngster a warm greeting, but when Dad reached for Kevin, he screamed. Mom dismissed it as a phase, a brief misunderstanding that would end when appropriate boundaries were set. Overnight she had done a lot of study on attachment issues. She was evaluated by Dr. Martinez using play and observation. She observed my siblings' instinctive move toward me. Before responding to inquiries, they asked for my permission. When they were afraid or perplexed, they turned to me for solace. She looked at my parents too. When Mom gazed at the younger children, her grin never reached her eyes. Dad was more interested in emails than his kid's life. Therefore, he was always checking his phone. Without looking at the tiny birthmark on Luna's wrist, neither of them could identify which twin was which. The attorney attempted to steer the narrative. He portrayed my parents as the victims of a troubled adolescent who had unnecessarily assumed parental responsibilities. He had copies of articles about sibling abuse from internet forums that showed how older kids controlled younger ones. Then Aiden took an unexpected action. He put his journal in front of Dr. Martinez after making his way to the table where the grown-ups were seated. He asked me to help him spell the words in a new entry he had written that morning. Since no one else looks after us, my sister does. She is not cruel, she adores us. Don't take her away, please. Mom's mask fell off. She yelled at Aiden for deceiving her, being duped and failing to comprehend. Ivy started to cry as her voice rose sharply. Aiden continued to write in his journal at the appropriate times, first his teacher's comments on the drawing and now this well-timed statement. These children appeared to be extremely well organized, like little detectives assembling evidence against our parents. They shared notes and collected evidence. Dad tried to soothe Mom, but it was too late. Dr. Martinez had witnessed the true identity of the performer. The assessment went on for hours. Grandma was interviewed by Dr. Martinez regarding her observations. Mrs. Patterson, who had heard from friends at church, showed up out of the blue. She described how she watched me raise 6 kids by myself while my parents' cars sat in the driveway. Ms. Roberts, my former instructor, also attended. Every falsified signature and every parent conference that I attended in its place were documented by her. My parents always claimed I was going through a phase when she attempted to get in touch with them over my absences. Like building blocks, the evidence accumulated. Every individual contributed to the concealed picture of my parents. Abuse and desertion. Mom became more and more irritated with every witness. Her facade as a wonderful mother broke. When the school counselor showed up with records of my deteriorating grades and fatigue, she blew up. Mom said that everyone was plotting against her and attempting to kidnap her kids. Dad attempted to repair the damage, but it was too late for Dr. Martinez. Enough was enough. She declared that she had to go straight to Ms. Chen. Her initial evaluation was clear, but the formal suggestion would take time. The youngsters had experienced emotional neglect and extreme parentification. The attorney for my parents attempted to fight, but even he appeared to recognize that things were changing. Before additional harm was done, he suggested that they depart. When Mom initially refused, she accused Grandma of poisoning the kids. She eventually stopped, though. When Kevin began sobbing and reaching for me, when the twins huddled under my legs and when even the courageous Aiden turned away from her, the ensuing hush was deafening. Threats of legal disputes and custody disputes followed them out. The attorney assured them that parents had rights and that this was not the end of it. His statements seemed hollow in light of the evidence of chronic neglect. But one terrible day did not negate years of giving food and shelter. Ms. Chen returned with formal documents. That evening Grandma was temporarily taking up emergency custody. We could remain together for the time being, but a thorough probe would come later. I was almost taken aback by the relief. I clutched my siblings close while Grandma signed documents. Although they were unaware of the legal nuances, they were aware that a significant event had occurred. If we could stay forever, Ivy asked. I was crying too much to respond. The next stages were described by Ms. Chen. Court hearings, custody reviews and required family counseling would all be part of the process. Initially, my parents would have the ability to visit under supervision. The immediate danger was over, but the procedure would be drawn out and challenging in private. She drew me away. She understood that I was in an impossible situation. She assured me that the most important thing was to keep us together. I knew the only way to protect my siblings and no one would punish me for it. Grandma put us to sleep that night in bed she had hurriedly set up in her guest rooms, actual beds with plenty of room for everyone and clean bedding. For the first time, Kevin's insistence on sleeping beside me felt more like a choice than a requirement. I listened to their quiet breathing while I lay awake. There will be fresh problems tomorrow. My folks were not easily discouraged. Evaluations, court dates and questions I didn't want to answer were all on the horizon. But we were safe tonight together. We were, and I had an adult who genuinely wanted to help. For the first time in 5 years, Grandma showed up at the doorway to see how we were doing again. I hired a better lawyer, she said, someone with expertise in situations similar to ours, someone who recognized that family is about more than simply blood. It's also about who shows up when it counts. We'd all be put to the test in the upcoming weeks. My parents would use every tactic they had, including emotional blackmail, legal wrangling and manipulation. However, a fundamental change had occurred. The facts were out. The show was over. I no longer had to defend the only family I cared about alone. The following morning, Grandma's house was in disarray. My parents showed up with 2 lawyers, their faces calculating, and icy. Mom appeared to be a mourning mother because of her conservative outfit. Dad had a heavy folder of papers with him. Overnight they submitted emergency motions. Their attorney said Grandma was facilitating a risky scenario and that I had abducted my siblings. They insisted that the kids be sent back right away. While a thorough inquiry was conducted, I kept my siblings in the back room while Grandma's attorney went over the paperwork. I observed through the window as Mom wiped away the lawyer's dry eyes. Dad was irritated by the inconvenience and kept checking his watch. Within an hour, Ms. Chen and her supervisor arrived. They had to evaluate the matter right away after receiving the emergency filing. As they clarified that such grave accusations necessitated prompt action, my stomach turned. Mrs. Susan, the supervisor, was a tough woman who insisted on questioning me by herself. Grandma's attorney suggested that I respond truthfully but cautiously. My hands were shaking in my lap as I sat across from her at the kitchen table. She questioned me sharply about the evening I called Grandma. Had I taken the kids without their consent? Yes, in theory, even though my parents had abandoned us. Had I not given them back? Yes, because they had left us to go on a cruise without context. Every sincere response seemed damning. Grandma was interviewed in the living room by my parents' attorneys. In the meantime, Mom was playing the victim so well that I could hear her voice rising every now and again. Overnight she had picked up new vocabulary related to emotional manipulation and parental estrangement. Despite being instructed to stay back, Aiden slipped into the kitchen. Mrs. Alicia kept a careful eye on us as he rubbed against my side. He immediately pointed to me when she asked him who looked after him. My chest constricted when she wrote something in her notes. The twins then fled, attracted by Aiden's lack of presence. As they had done 1,000 times. Before they climbed into my lap, I braided their hair every morning, since I was the only one who knew how, Linda stated to Mrs. Alicia. I trimmed the crust off their sandwiches perfectly, Luna added. Mrs. Alicia saw how they came to me effortlessly and how I met their needs without hesitation. She inquired as to whether they ever sought solace from their parents. The twins appeared perplexed. At last, Linda stated that they made one attempt, but Mom claimed to be busy. My siblings had all made their way to the kitchen by the afternoon. Kevin even toddled in dragging his blanket, even though he should have been sleeping with his thumb in his mouth. He snuggled into my arms and dozed off against my chest. Mrs. Alicia observed me skillfully managing 6 kids. I answered inquiries while resolving a fight between the twins over a crayon, fixing Ivy's twisted sock, reminding Aiden about his inhaler and helping Ethan with a splinter while holding Kevin. She inquired about healthcare. I remembered the pediatrician's direct phone number, as well as vaccination schedules, allergies, and prescriptions. Later, when she asked my parents the same questions, they were unable to identify any medications or allergies. Hours passed during the lawyer's argument. According to my parents' team, every minute of being away caused more psychological harm. Therefore, they insisted on a speedy return. Grandma's attorney retaliated by providing evidence of her abandonment and neglect. Dr. Martinez showed up for an urgent consultation. Because of the grave accusations, she had been required to conduct an assessment right away. My parents reenacted their routine, but there were visible fissures. Ivy interrupted and Mom yelled at her. Dad was too preoccupied with his phone to see Kevin's outstretched arms. I heard Mom whispering angrily to her lawyer during a break. She desired to defend herself. Grandma wouldn't allow them inside. They shouted charges of elder abuse and brainwashing. Someone reported a hostage scenario to the police. After the family turmoil, 2 officers showed up looking exhausted. They conducted individual interviews with each person. The stories of my siblings remained unchanged by that time. I looked after them. I had always looked after them. The officers took note of Ms. Chen's photographs and the lock on my bedroom door. They observed the evidence of neglect and the 1 bed for 7 kids. At midday the family court judge showed up. Kevin needed consolation at the worst possible moment. Talk about the timing of a toddler. When legal threats are made, nothing says. Let's make this custody evaluation interesting, like a drowsy infant requesting cuddling an elderly woman with keen eyes. Judge Reeves didn't miss anything. She set up a temporary courthouse in Grandma's dining room. She made it clear that this was only an initial hearing. First, my parents made their case. Their attorneys portrayed them as worried parents attempting to save their kids from the custody of a troubled adolescent. They had friends and character witnesses who never asked why they hadn't seen the kids. The evidence, however, was against them. Ms. Chen presented her research. Dr. Martinez gave an explanation of role reversal and parentification. Despite her skepticism, Mrs. Alicia testified that I was better than most people at managing 6 children. Each youngster was asked to speak by the judge. She overruled the objections of my parents' attorney. My siblings came clean one by one. Aiden described the lock. According to the twins, they slept on the floor. Ethan displayed his illustrations. Ivy said how hungry she was when I wasn't around to prepare meals. Kevin came last. His deeds spoke more than words. Even though he was only 2 years old, he waddled right to me when the judge asked him to go see his mother. He pressed closer to me and appeared perplexed when she explained that she was referring to his other mother. The attorney for my parents attempted damage control. He made arguments on momentary confusion, biological rights, and the necessity of expert assistance to re-establish healthy bonds. The judge, however, had had enough. She made the first decision: Grandma would be granted emergency custody of the kids. My parents would only be able to visit under supervision while they undergo thorough psychiatric testing, considering the proof of abandonment. Any criminal accusations were thrown out as baseless. Mom lost it. She cried out about the injustice, her rights, and how we would all come to regret this. She turned against her father as well, accusing him of failing to better manage the situation. Despite his attempts to soothe her. In front of everyone. Their flawless oneness broke. The incident made the extended family melt away in embarrassment. Quietly, the friends who had arrived as character witnesses departed. My parents' performance ended with no audience left and they were the only ones standing in Grandma's yard. They weren't finished, though. They tried everything over the next few weeks. Grandma was reported for elder abuse. They gave anonymous tips concerning substance use to CPS. They complained about truancy to the school board. 7 kids were flourishing in Grandma's care, according to the findings of every study. Now that I was able to attend classes, my attendance increased. Grades improved every day. Kevin's vocabulary increased. The twins gained enough self-assurance to occasionally play by themselves. The visits under supervision were a complete failure. Mom questioned the kids about what they told the judge. The entire time Dad was using his phone while seated in the corner periodically looking up to gripe about missing work. Because of unacceptable behavior, the supervisor terminated multiple visits early. They attempted to use gifts to manipulate. At visits, expensive goods showed up as rewards for love. However, Aiden shoved the car's remote control away, stating that he preferred to be read to. The twins questioned why their mother never braided their hair, ignoring the elegant dolls. Their attorney suggested that they demonstrate sincere transformation. They signed up for parenting classes, but they just seldom went. 3 therapists who suggested they might be at blame were dismissed after they began therapy, since they sincerely thought they had done nothing wrong. They were unable to pretend to be accountable. Grandma's home life meanwhile found new rhythms. Grandma now helps with breakfast, but I still got up early out of habit. My siblings started to trust Grandma, but they still turned to me for solace at times. Kevin would even take naps in her arms. School was once more feasible. I went to a school dance, met friends and joined study groups. Real parenting and constant care helped my siblings flourish. Aiden became less anxious. The twins became distinct individuals. Ethan's illustrations now included joyful people. 6 months later, the last custody hearing took place. My parents came in with their 4th set of new attorneys. They created a new story about wanting to mend their family, feeling overburdened and experiencing brief mental health issues. However, the evidence was overwhelming. Several professionals testified about the harm caused after 6 months of unsuccessful monitored visits. The explicit preferences of my siblings were well established. It appeared that even their new attorneys were aware of their defeat. I was the last to testify. I was asked exactly what I wanted by the judge. I was fearless when I told my parents the truth. For the first time in 6 years. I described the tiredness, loneliness and separation anxiety. I talked about being a kid myself and raising 6 kids. When Mom started to speak up, the judge cut her off. I went on to say that although I loved my siblings, I preferred to be their sister rather than their mother. Instead of owners, who viewed them as liabilities, they should have had biological parents. The judge's decision was prompt and unambiguous. Grandma had care of the entire family. The rights of my parents were diminished to twice-weekly monitored visits subject to the completion of parenting classes and therapy. According to government records, the parentification constituted serious emotional abuse. Without saying a word, my parents departed. There was no spectacular exit or finish to their performance. They just left, already talking to their attorneys about filing an appeal. Everyone understood, however, that it was finished. They had irreversibly lost their audience. We had a subdued celebration that evening. Grandma prepared a special meal. My siblings performed songs and drew pictures. When Kevin felt secure enough to let go, he crossed the living room for the first time on his own. We applauded as though he had won an Olympic gold medal. Months went by. The frequency of my parents' visits decreased. For social gatherings or business travels they cancelled in search of a new beginning. They eventually relocated 2 states away. Their visits decreased to once a month, then to once a holiday and finally to almost nothing. After 6 years of trauma, I began therapy to process it, to develop healthy attachment styles. My siblings went to play therapy in an effort to provide us with all we had been missing. Grandma voluntarily enrolled in parenting lessons. Although we weren't flawless, we were getting better. Grandma threw me a lavish celebration on my 15th birthday. School friends arrived, we overindulged in cake and played dumb games. Cards with pictures and misspelled words that signified everything were made for me by my siblings. I was feeling like a teenager for the first time. On a soggy Tuesday, the adoption was finalized. Grandma was formally appointed as our guardian. It had not been disputed by my parents. Their new lives had taken up too much of their time for fighting. Together with Grandma, the 7 of us formed a legal family. As we stood in the judge's chambers, I put my siblings to bed in their own rooms that night. They still occasionally joined me in storms, but now they do it voluntarily rather than out of need. I bid them good night, kissed their foreheads and made my way to my own chamber. I had homework on my desk and posters on the walls of my room. Because I was 15 and 15-year-olds needed privacy, the door was locked from the inside if I desired space for myself. As part of our new evening routine, Grandma showed up in my doorway. She inquired about my well-being, whether I needed anything and whether everyone was situated. These were such basic inquiries, yet they had profound implications. Someone else was watching, taking care of and raising. I took out my journal, which my therapist had given me. I wrote about typical adolescent topics like weekend plans, school drama and updates on crushes. The entries were as lovely and dull as they should have been. My siblings were doing well, loved and safe, and I was, at last,